Okay, this is Michael Grady with Legislative Council. I'm going to walk you through effectively the evolution of the regulation of cannabis cultivation as farming and what the Senate Ag Committee proposed for inclusion on H270 this morning. So in 2020, when cannabis was legalized, recreational cannabis, adult cannabis was legalized, there was debate about whether or not cannabis establishments, including cannabis cultivation, should be regulated as farming. I think you all know that farming enjoys what I call a multitude of regulatory benefits. It's exempt from Act 250, it's exempt from municipal regulation. It can enroll in use value and get a lower tax rate, property tax rate. It gets sales tax exemptions. It's exempt from groundwater withdrawal permitting, stormwater permitting. You don't need a certified electrician to wire your barn. You don't need a wastewater permit if for a toilet in your barn. The list goes on. So there was debate about whether or not cannabis cultivation should receive all of those regulatory benefits. And there were a couple of committee chairs who were fairly staunchly resistant to that. And one committee chair was just basically a no because of the revenue impacts that those regulatory benefits could have, meaning the tax exemptions that they might have on revenue and state. And the other committee chair was resistant really to indoor cultivation being considered farming because she was concerned about the energy use that's necessary for indoor cultivation, its land use effects, and similar concerns such as that. The committees looked at how some of the other states regulate cannabis cultivation, most notably Washington State. And Washington State just says it's an industry that has to comply with all relevant laws. And so that's where those two committee chairs trended. And that is why in Act 164 in 2020, the first provision in 7 VSA 869 says a cannabis establishment, and a cannabis establishment includes cannabis cultivation, shall not be regulated as farming under the RAPs or other state law, and cannabis produced from cultivation shall not be considered an agricultural product or agricultural crop for the purposes of use value, which is 32 VSA Chapter 124, 32 VSA 9741, which are the sales tax exemptions, other relevant law. It was not farming. Cannabis was not an agricultural crop. But there were persons that were interested in cultivating cannabis where their land was already in use value. And so the General Assembly said that the cultivation on ag land and the use of farm buildings that are already enrolled in use value does not disqualify that land or building from use value if the ag land or farm building is enrolled in use value at the time cannabis cultivation commences. It is not transferred to another owner. The cultivation is or processing is done by a licensed small cultivator on 1,000 square feet or less, and all other requirements of 32 VSA Chapter 124, which is use value, continue to be met. So it's not farming, but some small cultivators could still keep their land in use value if it was already in use value. And then the section went on to say that cannabis cultivation had to comply with all state, federal, and local environmental laws. It said on page 2 that a cannabis establishment was subject to regulation by a municipality, by municipal bylaw. It said that that cannabis cultivation did need to follow some of the RAPs, and that last persons cultivating cannabis had to comply with the worker safety protection standards of federal law for those people who are handling pesticides in their employment. So that was what was initially passed. There was a request last year for small cultivators to receive some of the regulatory benefits of farming while not being considered farming entirely. So that was addressed in Acts and Resolves number 158. You'll see that sub A remains there. Cannabis establishment shall not be regulated as farming. Cannabis is not an ag product. But the language about small cultivators that were in use value when they commenced cannabis cultivation is struck. And that's because on page 4, there was a new subsection that was added that says, notwithstanding subsection A, so notwithstanding the provision that says cannabis cultivation is not farming, it's not an ag crop, a small cultivator licensed under the chapter who initiates cultivation outdoors on a parcel of land that was subject to the RAPs prior to licensed cultivation. So small cultivator on land that was already ag land, already subject to the RAPs, shall be regulated in the same manner as farming and not as development under Act 250. Shall not be regulated by a municipal bylaw in the same manner that required agricultural practices are not regulated by a municipal bylaw. Shall be eligible to enroll in use value, provided that the ag land or farm building where cannabis cultivation occurs was enrolled in use value prior to commencement of the cannabis cultivation, and the parcel continues to qualify for enrollment. And then that cannabis cultivation by a small cultivator shall qualify for the 3 ag sales tax exemptions. That's what happened last year. This year, the cultivators had come in and they have asked for those 4 regulatory benefits to apply to all cultivation. And so you will see on page 7, outdoor cultivation.
Thank you.
So notwithstanding subsection A, so notwithstanding the fact that cannabis cultivation is not farming, a cultivator who initiates cultivation on a parcel of land outdoors shall be regulated as farming and not development under Act 250, so exempt from Act 250 definition of development, shall not be regulated by a municipal bylaw, in the same manner as RAPs, shall be eligible to enroll in use value, but the land doesn't have to have been enrolled prior. So this allows new cultivators who aren't necessarily already on farmland to find land that's suitable for cultivation and initiate cultivation there and then enroll that land in use value. Shall also get the sales tax exemptions. And then today, the committee downstairs recommended that cannabis cultivation outdoors be entitled to the rebuttable presumption that cultivation does not constitute a nuisance under the right to farm law, in the same manner as agricultural activities are entitled to that rebuttable presumption under the existing statute. So just evolution, when it was first enacted, cannabis cultivation was not farming, enjoyed no regulatory benefits except very small cultivators who are already in use value could continue to be in use value. That was expanded to provide for small cultivators could get the regulatory benefits of Act 250 exemption, municipal bylaw exemption, use value enrollment on land that was already in UVA, and then sales tax exemptions. Now it's every outdoor cultivator gets those 4 regulatory benefits that I described, plus they're entitled to the rebuttable presumption that they are not a nuisance. Doesn't mean that somebody can't bring a nuisance. It's just that they need to meet a higher standard in order for the court to find that a nuisance occurred. So that's where things stand. The Senate committee's proposal was really just a recommendation to the Economic Development Committee who is going to take up the bill on Friday, and the bill has more in it than just these provisions.
And the bill is the miscellaneous H-270
H-270.
cannabis bill that we voted, the House voted out a few weeks back. Representative Supranat and then Representative Templin. And can I just suggest that we try and limit questions and comments to legal questions that Mike can help with, and we'll have time to talk about policy and implications and so forth. But with that, yeah, Heather.
So somebody asked me, as it relates to our bill, the Small Farmer Diversification and Transition Grant Program, these farmers, cannabis farmers, would not be eligible for the grant program, right? Because it's still not considered an ag product and it's still not considered farming, even though there's the regulatory benefits, right?
That's correct.
Okay, great.
So there's nothing in this proposed language that changes that.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
And it doesn't change what farming is for purposes of NRCS grants or most of the other programs, that just these 5 programs.
The ones that you listed off the top. Okay.
So how are mixed use licenses being covered?
So the original proposal was to have the 5 regulatory benefits apply to outdoor cultivation and mixed use cultivation, because some of that is grown outside. But at the recommendation of the board, it was just limited to outdoor cultivation, because there's at least a proposal that mixed use goes away, or the distinction between outdoor and mixed use goes away. So they didn't want that distinction to be written into statute right now. And so it's now just outdoor cultivation. Now, that portion of the outdoor cultivation and mixed use would qualify, but not the whole establishment.
Right, just that part.
Mm.
And then, a cultivator, an outdoor cultivator, could apply for current use, but the footprint is so small for a cultivation. Like, what's the advantage there? In terms of property tax savings,
So you can qualify for current use with the property that's less than 20, was it 20 acres? If you show income provisions. In addition, the committee downstairs heard a lot of testimony about, although there's square footage limitations on the different tiers of cultivators, that some of the cultivators are not trying to meet the square footage limitations, they're trying to meet the number of plant limitations. And they're actually growing their plants further apart from each other. And I think one cultivator said that he was growing on 3 to 4 acres. And so it's not just the tight 1,000 square foot or 20,000 square foot footprint. It can be up to, according to this one cultivator, 3,000 square feet. So this is agricultural land underneath use value. It has produced an annual gross income from the sale of farm crops in one of 2 or 3 of the 5 calendar years preceding of at least $2,000 for parcels of up to 25 acres. So you can enroll something that's less than 25 acres if you can show it's produced an annual gross income from the sale of farm crops in one of 2 or 3 of the 5 calendar years. Now remember, cannabis is not a farm crop, but this regulatory provision allows for the enrollment of that land. So that's, and what the regulatory benefit is I don't remember the exact ag land assessment. It's like $1.50 or I think per acre, but it's less than what your typical fair market value assessment is going to be.
Okay.
We can get JFO to come back and talk us through those numbers too. Go ahead, Chuck.
Like, so hemp has all the benefits of farming and agriculture, right?
Yes, but, so the Agency of Agriculture has, surrendered its program to the USDA. And so I don't think many people will be growing hemp in the state because of the USDA's requirements. Among which are you can't exceed 0.3 THC in your crop. If you do, it has to be destroyed. Prior to even harvesting your crop, you have to test it by a DEA lab so that you know that it meets standards. There are no DEA labs in Vermont. If you somehow exceed the 0.3 with a mens rea, that is more than negligence, which I don't know what that means. That's a felony. That's referred to US DOJ, not the state's attorney. And so there are just provisions in the USDA rule that it may be difficult for most people who previously grew hemp to meet.
So that's what I was wondering, if you're growing hemp, but your crop, say, just even because of climate, goes over that allowable THC level, are you no longer in agricultural land, you're in?
No, if you were growing hemp with a USDA license, as soon as it goes over 0.3, you're supposed to destroy it.
But would all the potential benefits go away too?
No, I think if you were complying with your license, you would still be considered farming in Vermont. But, and I think did I discuss this in here last week? So when you are on a farm, a larger farm, many farms get funding from the state and or NRCS. And Oregon NRCS basically has this handout. It's to its staff, but it's really kind of like, hey, this is what's going to happen to you if you grow cannabis on your farm that's getting NRCS funding. But this is how you can get around that. It basically says if you're growing cannabis on a farm that receives NRCS funding and an NRCS inspector goes out and sees that, you lose all of your funding for your entire farm because your NRCS grant says you have to comply with all state and federal law. And federal law continues to ban cannabis cultivation. And so you lose all of your funding. They'll still give you technical assistance for your non-cannabis crop, but you're out of NRCS funding. But then they say, unless if you meet the substantially separate test, and then you can show that the cannabis was grown on 3 of the 4 following, on land that's not part of your farm, by an ownership entity that's different from your farm, that uses different equipment, or that uses different employees. If you can show 3 of those 4, you're substantially separate, and the cannabis will be considered a separate operation. And then they will continue to fund you. But that's a process. It's part of the investigation process if they go out and they find cannabis on your farm.
Okay.
So on that basis, if a farmer were to have, say, a sheep operation and a cannabis operation, each one would need to be enrolled with current use separately.
Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily. And this part of what will happen is PVR is going to have to work out some of the details. But you can you can enroll, you put in your application to say that you're ag land, and then you have to show that you're a farmer. And so those are two different definitions. The farmer definition, one of the ways that you qualify as a farmer is you show that you had 50% of your income from farming as defined by the IRS code, or you produce farm crops that are processed in a farm facility situated on land enrolled, and then you meet the gross income for that. So it's possible to get both your sheep land and your cannabis land enrolled, and you could probably do it together. It might actually help you for meeting both the farmer definition and the ag land definition. But PBR is going to have to work some of the stuff out.
We've been thinking about the RAPs in the context of S115 and stormwater runoff. For somebody who's growing cannabis, what would that, how would the RAPs, and maybe this isn't a question for you, Mike.
No, it's so the legislature addressed that in 2020. They said, hey, cannabis cultivation is not farming, but it has to follow some of the RAPs. So it has to follow the RAPs regarding conditions, restrictions, and operating standards. It has to follow them for groundwater quality and groundwater quality investigations, and it has to follow them for subsurface tile drainage. So that's any cannabis cultivation, any cannabis establishment has to follow that. But with the 5 regulatory benefits as proposed by Senate Ag, they will be regulated in the same manner as the required agricultural practices under municipal law. So that means the municipality can't enforce its setbacks. The municipality can't enforce its structure requirements. The municipality, we're working out whether or not it can enforce its nuisance requirements, because there's language in another part of the cannabis statutes that says that they may be able to, but we're working on that. And so they get that regulatory benefit of the municipal exemption for the RAPs.
And then the last one, the right to farm, the rebuttable presumption. Can you speak a little bit more to what that, the practical meaning of that?
The practical meaning of it is that anyone that's a private entity that wants to show that the cannabis operation has a significant impact on the use and enjoyment of their land will have to meet a higher standard. They'll have to not just show significant interference with use and enjoyment. They're going to have to show what the criteria are for right to farm, which is, let me just call it up. Has to show it's conducted in conformity with federal, state, and local laws, including the RAPs. It is consistent with good ag practices established prior to surrounding non-agricultural activities, and it has not significantly changed since the commencement of the prior surrounding non-ag activity. It's likely that some private property owners that border cannabis cultivation will be able to show that some of these factors are not met. But if the farm can show that those factors are met, then the ag activity does not constitute a nuisance unless the person bringing the claim shows that there is a substantial adverse effect on health, safety, or welfare, or the cannabis cultivation has a noxious and significant interference with the use and enjoyment of the neighboring property. So again, it doesn't prevent a nuisance suit, but it's an additional step and a step up that a person would have to bringing the suit would have to meet in order to bring the suit.
Aren't all cannabis operations not conforming with federal law?
Well, good question.
What was the question?
The conforming with federal law piece.
So underneath state statute, they are supposed to comply with all applicable state, federal, and local environmental, energy, or public health law unless otherwise provided. It should probably, because we limited it here to local environmental, energy, or public health law. Yeah, it's not in conformance with federal law. But again, you're gonna have to go to court to show that. So, and I can think about how to address that. I can think about how to address it in the language that's going to go into 270.
Why don't you suggest that going forward, they run language by Representative Rice?
I think that'd be a good idea.
Not the first time.
Yeah, Mr. Scrutinization.
Yeah, John.
Mike, do indoor grows have to follow certain route? Thinking production areas.
Yes, every cannabis establishment has to meet those three RAP provisions: operation standards, groundwater use, and subsurface tile use.
So if they're following RAPs, going back to our stormwater debate, could they be subject to municipal bylaws, or did they get exemptions?
No, they don't get that. Indoor cultivation would not qualify for that municipal exemption from stormwater regulation.
So they would pay a fee for
Yeah.
impervious surface like everybody else.
Okay, well, so we obviously don't have this bill, and this is language that passed the Ag Committee today, you said?
So the bill wasn't formally in their committee. They were just asked to look at the question of cannabis cultivation and how it would be regulated as farming. And so what they passed out today was a straw vote recommending the sections be added to 270 in the Senate Economic Development Committee.
Okay. So possibly we will see it again more formally.
Yeah, Senate Economic Development is looking at it at 10:30 on Friday morning. But there's more in the bill than just this. And so I don't know how long, or if they're going to come back to it again, when they're going to come back to it again, et cetera.
Okay, good. So we'll have another opportunity to look at language, if there is language that comes over here. And we'll have opportunity to take testimony from whoever we might want to hear from. If at that point it would be helpful to go back and sort of revisit what's the current statute, what's the proposal, either having Mike walk through or having somebody maybe from Senate come over and do that walkthrough too. We can have that, but this should just give us a little bit of a starting place, a foundation for understanding where cannabis is currently being, how it's being regulated farming wise and what proposal might be. Good. All right. Well, thanks for coming over and up, Mike. And